It's David.
How's it going?
Pretty good, you?
Not bad, not bad.
Cool.
Like
Okay.
debating whether I should join these meetings just on my computer or like the actual rooms, just connecting to like the office rooms. But
It is possible to use the video conferencing
yeah,
unit to join Zoom meetings.
yeah, I think I just can't write anything in chat or read anything that people write in chat though. So I don't know.
Yeah. So sometimes I just like eat that penalty. Other times I like bring my
Yeah,
laptop and just turn off the camera and
yeah,
mic and audio and
yeah, yeah.
put that in. I forget if it shows the chats in like a pop-up or not. For Zoom.
Maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe, but I can't click on it and navigate to it. So
Yeah. For a while there, before we discovered that you could use the consoles for that, or maybe the feature was added. I don't know. Um, we all were on our individual laptops,
yeah,
which was super annoying because like echo.
yeah,
And so we kind of like chose a dedicated laptop to be the
mm,
microphone and
yeah,
the audio. But
yeah,
then you wouldn't know who was talking. Not like you know who's talking when it's a conference room anyway, but at least you can
yeah.
like see their voices, their mouths move or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey,
Is my audio fine or is it a little bit distant?
I mean, it's fine. If you're looking for like notes on production quality, um, then a little like tinny, I guess. Or are
How
you trying
about
to have
now?
like perfect audio or just be heard? Sorry, say again.
Sorry. I changed my speaker instead of my microphone, so I couldn't hear you. Second. How about now?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was fine either way. I was just wondering if you were like trying to have perfect audio, and
Yeah.
you'd like got a mic and stuff and that kind of thing.
I tried a couple of mics, but it didn't work out. I don't know. I have a tendency that during conversation, my voice tends to lower down, and then
Mm.
I need to remind myself to speak loudly. Sometimes. So that kind of makes it difficult for the people to hear, especially I'm talking over microphone or something. So.
I have the opposite problem where I'm like my voice needs to make it through the screen. I don't know what it.
Yeah. I saw your comments, Max, on generate PR, and I'm working on the changes. So I think it should be good for good good after today. I'm sorry for missing that whole part about adding a status field on constraint status.
No, that's okay. And there is like an interesting philosophical question about whether a status field should be actionable or not.
Yeah.
I think this is fine. I think there was a CVE in Kubernetes, though, at one point where if you wrote a particular status field, you could actually open up some kind of network path or something. This is like a few years ago. Yeah. that was less good. And I suppose you could, in theory, abuse this status field by setting the clock, or sorry, setting the timestamp hyper like late in the future. Um, I don't know. If you wanted to be paranoid, you could like sanity check the status field every time, and if it's like longer than the wait from now, or sorry, if the time difference from now plus the wait time, if that's like ends before the expected you're good to go timestamp passes, move the you're good to go timestamp. That would also handle like situations where there's clock skew, where the pod gets restarted.
Yeah.
And, for some reason it was in 2026, the old pod, and now you're back in 2020, I guess,
Yeah.
5 soon.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's a good idea. I'm gonna comment on the code I'm writing to make sure to address this as well.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about clock skew, it's like kind of paranoid. On the other hand, if we ever hit this issue, it's going to be friggin' impossible to debug. So being a little defensive might save everyone some pain. Like NTP is pretty good. Like seconds should be an outlier. It's just, maybe NTP is disabled on the node or whatever.
Um, and I had one more question. So right now, what I'm implementing is I'm adding create after timestamp in by pod status. So even if by mistake, if multiple pods have generation are available, it won't conflict. And what we should do is that uh, the earliest create after times we should consider earliest create after timestamp to uh, create the VAP binding. So that's what I'm doing right now. Does it work or does it
Uh,
make sense? I think it works, but does it make sense?
the risk there is, like, let's say if clock skew in the other direction, right? Like there's one pod that's a year in the past, then you're just not going to wait. And the more nodes you have participating, the higher the likelihood that you encounter that situation, which again, admittedly, is not like super high likelihood. But if someone does have a setup where they don't have NTP enabled, this can become a problem. I would be tempted to have like the most like correct thing from a clock perspective would be to have the machine only honor its own timestamps, right? Because a clock should be calibrated with respect to itself. Um, the risk there is, if a pod restarts, let's say you have a delay of 30 seconds, a pod restarts at 29 seconds, then you're going to wait another 30 seconds, right? And if that pod dies again at 29 seconds, then it's another 30 seconds, right? So if you have some abnormally flaky pod, you could wind up never enabling VAP generation. So I think that's a pick your poison thing. And then, of course, like there's the medium approach of kind of first right wins, right? Where you don't have it in the bipod field, but if it's set, you do not reset it, barring the sanity check. I think it's fine. Like, honestly, the singleton thing, users should be expected to maintain platform invariance. The one sort of like edge case there is deployments, right? During a rollout, the rollout strategy. If they pick the wrong one, you can wind up like breaking that singleton contract for a bit, and that's like kind of hard to both detect and guard against. Whereas if someone has straight up configured their cluster for multiple pods, that you could statically detect. So it should be easier to debug. So what failure mode is best? I think one thing's for sure, we want to not rely on the clock once the deadline is passed, right? We should set a separate field like a Boolean saying we're good to go, right?
So
And, good.
that's there is one more field called created on constraint template, which basically gets set when at least one pod uh, reports no errors. But that becomes trickier in this part because if a pod that reports no error isn't really generating CRD or VAP binding, we can't really rely on that field, right?
Yeah, well, we shouldn't rely on that field like at all. That's kind of a legacy field because and that gets set. It was meant to get set when the CRD got created, which in this case, because we're looking for a timestamp after the CRD got created, that doesn't really work. The created field, I think, makes a little more sense now that we've migrated to singleton generator, or will migrate to singleton generator. So probably what we're looking at is a field that basically says VAP generation unblocked. I don't like any name I come up with off the top of my head, but that's the basic uh, thing we're looking to gate. Multiple clocks, multiple clocks. Hi, kitty. Oh, you're for my glasses. I think I'm trying to think about like the first right wins versus the multiple clocks strategy. Like they should kind of be the same if the user has configured things appropriately. And first right wins in the case where users haven't configured things appropriately, or there's like some transient inappropriateness, like with deployment, creating multiple pods.
Yeah, quick context, Rita. Sorry to cut you off, Max.
Yeah.
We were just discussing about the generate operation PR that I have up, and uh, and I was just asking that if create after timestamp field makes sense under bypod status rather than the constraint, so that if multiple pods are setting that flag by mistake or anything like that, we can make sure to get the timestamp from each and then get the latest one that is applicable to our case. But for as Max raised that, what if some pod is running like 10 years behind? That will mean that that pod already has the timestamp gap already covered, so that can cause problems.
Yeah, I
But
think.
so,
Go
on follow up with that, Max, right? Let's say a pod is running 10 years behind and the timestamp of that pod uh, it is going to be definitely earlier than the other pods. But if the generate operation is true on that pod, it still makes sense to create the create VAP binding after waiting on that timestamp, right, through that pod.
Okay, yes. Okay. And so what that leads me to is I think first right wins with sanity checking for of the timestamp of like take the pod's current time, add the delay, make sure that the timestamp is not greater than that. that I think balances both risks, right? Because if every pod writes a timestamp, then regardless of whether generate is set on that pod or not, that pod contributes to the probability of failure due to clock skew.
I'm just yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned it before, but I'm right now currently setting that field if and only if the pod has generate operation on.
Okay. Yeah, I still would not put it in bipod status then because of garbage collection. So because the bipod status resource, it has a owner reference to the pod that created it. If that pod dies, Kubernetes garbage collects the bipod status resource, so that state will go away, which leads us to that like condition where VAPs never get generated if you get some sort of like failure after failure of the gatekeeper pod. So my instinct is the a pod a field directly under status is appropriate here. I don't know, I'm being a little paranoid with the failure after failure thing, right? That's not super likely. I think what you'll wind up seeing is like one or two, maybe three sequential failures, right? Within the span of like 30 seconds, if any. So users will just see like longer than expected delays. Whereas the perma timestamp thing, what that biases toward is actually shorter than specified delays. So yeah, I don't think there's an obvious right answer here. Just that my instinct is that having it be created eventually, and knowing that that's I would imagine users would prefer the bias towards creation rather than extended delay before creation. Curious if people have thoughts on that.
So in this field, right, like the first right wins kind of situation. Let's say a pod is running behind
Mm-hmm.
about an hour, and then the
Oh,
timestamp it writes is sorry. Go ahead.
first right wins with sanity check. Right. So if there's already, so what's going to happen, right, is if you have multiple pods trying to write literally at the same time, Kubernetes API server is going to pick a winner. Basically, the first one will win, and the second one will go, your resource version is out of date. I'm going to reject the write, try again. At which point, the pod will attempt to reconcile, right? And then it will observe that there's a timestamp, and it will check that timestamp with its own clock, right? And if that clock is in the future, right, then it's going to go, oh, this date makes no sense. I'm going to use my timestamp. And then it will write. It will make the decision to write. And so what you'll wind up with is effectively the earliest clock among all pods that participate in this process will win out. So it's kind of the equivalent of the logic that you were talking about with the bipod reasoning. It just eliminates the possibility of lost state due to garbage collection. So and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, again, that depends on like how concerned you are about that case of pods constantly being killed, which I guess because this commonly runs with audit, you could imagine like an ooming type situation, right? Where the third resource to be audited or something like is large, and so it causes the pod to die on a regular cadence. So maybe it's not like entirely unlikely for an audit pod to repeatedly die in under 30 seconds.
But to counter your example of pod looking at a clock that's in future, right? Like so by that example, the another pod looking at the same clock would get that this clock is in past, and I'm good to create the VAP binding resources, but
Mhm.
that window is still within 30 seconds. So let's say pod A running behind an hour is the first write successful and updates the creation timestamp to be the 30 seconds past an hour, right? And the
Mhm.
pod second running in a current time looks at that and realizes, hey, this constraint has been, the approval for this constraint to create VAP binding has been there for an hour. Therefore, I can create the binding at whatever time and attempts to create right away. And then we
Mhm.
run into the same problem.
Different problem. Sorry. So you're right that the problem of early creation is identical across those two solutions, right? The bipod or the first write wins directly under status. The way those two solutions differ is in the case where the timestamp keeps getting deleted, right? That doesn't happen in the root solution. Both of them are vulnerable to the eager creation problem. Uh, and honestly, I'm kind of fine with that, given that the conditions for even hitting that issue would be one, uh, you need to have multiple pods comparing the timestamp, right? So either a user is misconfigured gatekeeper, or there's a transient issue with the deployment, or there's been a rescheduling of the pods to a node with a different clock, right? Which should be a relatively rare thing to happen coinciding with the creation of constraint templates. But two, also NTP would need to have like large amounts of skew, which granted, if NTP didn't, we wouldn't have these problems at all. But what I'm saying is, I think that we're already looking at a low probability event here, right? So we just want to do what's easy to minimize the impact of the low probability event. But if we really, really, really want to ensure accurate time, like I'm honestly not 100% sure that's a solvable problem with unknown infrastructure, which is what we're contending with, right? Because we don't know users' clusters, right? Like if someone put an atomic clock in all their computers, perfect. Uh, but not everyone does that, sadly. I do. I don't.
Cool. So then I'll change my code to move it up.
Yeah, like if by the way, if I'm just like missing a solution, someone please tell me. I haven't thought very deeply about this.
There's always less complicated ways, but it's probably not as accurate. Like if you just wait 30 seconds.
Right. That's vulnerable then to like the pod constantly dying, which I think is a more likely scenario than the clock skew.
As I was looking at the PR, one thing I mean, I don't know why I didn't bring this up before, but it's like now the generation is on the same pod as audit. If that pod home kills or dies, whatever, we don't even get the generations. Whereas like now, at least it's separation of concerns, right? So this
Yeah.
is somewhat related, I promise. Yeah.
No. That's true, and that goes to my point of like, oh shit, it
Yeah.
could die every 30 seconds because audit and memory risk. If that is a concern for people, they can always run generation in a separate pod, then audit.
Another
That's
singleton.
why we have that. Yeah.
I know that's one answer. I'm just not loving it because it's like then it's like you gotta choose between like reliability versus like more footprint on the cluster.
But
I don't have an answer. I just thought that was an impact of the change that we didn't talk about.
well, it's an impact of the change on the default infrastructure. One thing that occurred to me is if people really want the previous behavior, they totally can. They could just put the generation operation on all the webhook pods, and it'll be the same behavior as before.
Same goes with other like singleton processes, right? Like we don't really check if they're multiple today, right? Like say audit.
Yeah, I think the difference between, I mean, audit is kind of special in that one, audit's an expensive operation in terms of the requests it sends to the API server. But two, there's no like semantic space in the schema of the resource to accommodate multiple audit processes. So they will literally fight each other.
Yeah, but I'm just saying nothing prevents people from doing it today and shooting themselves in the foot, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
What could go wrong? Yeah.
Can we even control that factor? Like we can't check in the other pod that if the audit is running somewhere else or not, right?
You could write a gatekeeper constraint.
That's funny. Why not?
And you will get the audit results in audit. Hey, you have multiple audits running because you can't block it.
Exactly. I mean, you can block it. Oh, well, no, you're right. Not with gatekeeper specifically, but even like referential stuff, like blocking is kind of a iffy proposition, right? Because there's a bit of a race condition with the cache being populated. So, yeah, admission time blocking, not necessarily. You would need to use Gator. Gator is how you would appropriately do this in CI/CD. Or some equivalent thing, but yeah,
Let's
static.
make sure at least the doc is clear about I shall not run this multiple. Like I like for example, I think we do a good job of it saying, hey, audit is a standalone, right? But I don't think we do that for like say status, right? You know what I'm saying?
Let's look.
Like so like
Page,
um
docs, status.
at least I don't remember adding it, but for audit we definitely say, hey, it should be singleton.
Let's see, are we looking at the operations things? Status.
I'm gonna find it. Jeez.
In order to do its job eliminating write contention effectively, the status operation should be run as a singleton.
Okay.
So if they are looking at, I don't know if we're exposing it anywhere else, but if they're looking at this part of the docs.
Okay, so status and audit, it does mention singleton, yeah. But I think like saying other as well, right? Like mutation status is another one. What are all the other options, operations?
They're all on this page. This documents all the operations.
Now clicking on it. Okay. This one, okay. But mutation status doesn't say singleton, right?
You are correct. It like references, it says it behaves like the status operation, except it only applies for mutation resources.
Yeah.
So it like kind of incorporates it by reference, but
So like today, we have no idea how people are actually doing this in the wild, and so they could have multiple controllers that's updating the status at this and fighting it, I guess.
in fact, are they guaranteed? There was something where we didn't have appropriate locks. So there was I think I think Avinash, as part of his PR, he fixed some places where there was some controllers that weren't operation gated. I'm forgetting exactly what those were at the moment. I mean, the good thing is if status isn't run as a singleton, you just increase the network load in the cluster and the request load to the API server. Like there's some write amplification that happens, but everything still works.
Okay, well, just to close the loop on this, I guess docs is one way.
Yeah, we should definitely document the
I don't
operations.
think there's any other way to address this, like to actually enforce it. And then like the the time check, like I guess we're still just using are we still using the create time of the constraint template CRD?
We should absolutely not
Okay,
use
what did we decide on?
the time from the clock of the machine that created the CRD, which is slightly different than the create time, right? Because the create time is set by the API server, which may be on a different machine.
How do we get that? The clock of the one that created the CRD?
A new field under constraint status called like create after or whatever tab field that's.
Constraint template status.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, constraint templates. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
No worries. And we should also have a non-clock based thing for once the timer actually runs out.
And
Just so
just
that we,
it's the new field under status for the CRD, right? Not the constraint, not like the constraint the CRD for the constraints, not the constraint template object, right?
so the constraint template object under status, it should have a field called block creation until or something like that. Arguably, you shouldn't have, again, like a syntactically important field in status, so we should maybe massage that naming again. But so that may involve updating the constraint template CRD, or maybe it has a schemaless status. I forget at this point. Status on constraint template, honestly, that needs to be disentangled from the framework. It should also have another field saying creation allowed or something.
Full CRD, right? Not the constraint template object.
No, the template object itself. Like you could put it on the CRD, but
well, but the problem is, or the issue here is that VAP is looking for the actual CRD, not constraint template object.
VAP is not a party to this concern, right? Because Gatekeeper will avoid creating the VAP binding until these conditions are met, right? Like we have no control over what VAP does. We're not relying on VAP other than VAP using binding as like the salient.
Yeah. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about how VAP receives this information. I'm saying so I think what you're saying is using that information from the constraint template object is we guarantee that the CRD is created.
Well, so the controller creates the CRD, right? It calls client.create.
Yes.
And then if it succeeds, right, then it can write a timestamp. Arguably, there's another situation where the pod dies before it gets created, in which case it will call update, right? And if update succeeds, it will write the timestamp. Again, like this is if we do like sanity checking of the clock, this logic.
Right. I'm just arguing that this new field, the time should be when that CRD was actually created, not when the constraint template object was created.
Correct.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is the timestamp value should be sourced from the clock of the requesting machine, not the metadata.creation timestamp.
Yes, understood.
Okay.
That one I understood from the very beginning.
Okay.
I'm just making sure that the new field that you're adding is not just about constraint template object, but the actual CRD. Because in the event that constraint template object is created, but this actual CRD took a while. You know what I mean? That could happen. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
Okay.
Also, maybe not status, maybe we want to do annotations. Like just to be anal about K or M conventions. Because annotations are allowed to like alter how an object is interpreted. Whereas if we actually gate behavior off of status, like that, it shouldn't cause problems, but it has caused problems, right? Like I referenced that CVE where status actually opened up network paths.
Yeah, I'm good with annotations.
Okay. Yeah, the other option would be to like put it in the spec or something, but that also seems wrong because I feel like the user should own the spec.
Yeah. We introduced this spec, but that still ultimately is set by users. So yeah, that was what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm good on this one. I'll update the PR before EOD or like tomorrow morning.
Is this the first item in the agenda?
No,
Yes.
this was not in the agenda actually.
Oh, okay.
While we were
Oh,
waiting for you guys.
Yeah. What we're talking about. Okay.
I thought it's like supporting generative policy. I thought is this not what that item was?
No, I was just waiting for Rita and Sartaj to join, and I was about to ask you a quick question, but that kind of got expanded into a 40-minute discussion.
Never a quick question on this call. You should know that by
Yeah. But I'm glad actually that is more, I think that is a timely, immediately needed more because if we want to get it in 318, probably it's good to
So generative policy means something different here. We're not talking about generating templates. Are we talking about like arbitrary generative policy?
So yeah, I was actually talking with someone, and I was also looking at Kaivarano, and the ask was basically they want to create PDB when deployments are created. Like they want to create policies that creates PDB that takes like some data from deployment, and then whenever desired deployments are submitted, they want to create PDB as well.
What is it? Sorry, BDB, PDB?
Pod distribution budget. Sorry.
Okay. Pod disruption budget. Okay.
No, yeah, sorry.
No worries.
And can you add the example in that? Because that one sentence it doesn't say enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that makes me one thing that security hold, like privilege escalation, comes to mind with this. Like we definitely, there's a blurring of RBAC boundaries when you have policy, when you have capabilities like that. That's one thing to watch out for.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat yourself? I was multitasking, looking for example to add to. I don't. I'll.
Yeah. Also, Certesh is a wisest PR chore. Which PR? But privilege escalation. Whenever you have a feature like that, right? Because Gatekeeper is super privileged. Basically, people who have the ability to create those kinds of configs would have the ability to clobber secrets, right? That kind of thing, which is scary. And also maybe less scary, but maybe not, is just generally like incorrect use of that feature could undermine Kubernetes RBAC generally, right? Like if you think about deployments and pod security policy back in the day, one problem was that because deployments create pods and the deployment controller is creating those pods, you could kind of leverage the permission of the deployment service account to bypass pod security policy controls if people weren't aware of that nuance. There's also like maybe the same kind of concern with mutation. Yeah. Like honestly, why? I feel like the better place to do this is in a shift left scenario, right? Yeah. Do people feel strongly about this feature? Like, Caverno's had this for forever, and I've been skeptical about it, the security implications for just as long.
So what you're proposing is we should do this cater to just generate the respective resources in the shift left, and then users can apply those resources if they have.
I'm suggesting it's feature creep, to be honest, and maybe dangerous in and of itself. Like putting it in Gator would shift it left, to be clear. But I don't know, like, are we building a Swiss Army knife, or what are we building? Something focused and yeah, like, is this a feature that's like, is it responsible to have this feature? I realize I'm like kind of implying it was irresponsible of Caverno to develop it, and maybe I don't know. Yeah, do people have thoughts as to why it's not a problem security wise?
Wouldn't people who create or users who create constraint template have higher authority already?
They do, but that doesn't necessarily translate to them being able to modify the cluster, right? So they can create denial of service attacks for sure by like creating a denial constraint. If they have permissions to create sync sets, they can exfiltrate secrets, right? That's part of the reason why syncs are different than constraint templates, is so that users of Gatekeeper can provide that trust boundary. Mutation probably is the biggest risk factor here, right? Like you could, in theory, create a mutation rule for all secrets and make all secrets include your private or public key or whatever. And then suddenly you own the cluster. That's a fun attack.
From that perspective, this mutation would basically could have that effect too, right? If you put a PDB that, you know, does very bad things, the whole app could be disrupted, right?
Yeah. Which then, like, okay, well then maybe the person who has permissions to create whatever generator instructions is equivalent to cluster admin, right? And so you lock down the set of people who could do that to cluster admin.
Yeah, in some way it's almost like kind of reminds me of like PSAs, in that there are certain practice that you may want to enforce across the cluster. Like say no privilege pot, right? But that's a security thing, right? Whereas this is like, oh, I want to make sure all my apps have certain PDB, right? So I can see that. It's like a cluster level decision that you want to make sure everybody's following the right guidance. But it could be if not done correctly, yeah.
I mean, the other thing it would require is, like, right now Gatekeeper has global read permissions. This would require Gatekeeper to have global write permissions.
I mean, sidecar, I can literally write a mutation that inserts a sidecar for everything, right? Like I could.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not a big fan of mutation for
Yeah.
that's one of those reasons.
Yeah. Understood. I'm just saying that is doable today, right? Is you're potentially you could set some global thing today even if you wanted to.
Yes, this would.
But I think
more.
this would be, sorry, I think this would be different in a sense that for current purposes, the user intends to create a particular resource. Like we can only mutate pod if pod comes through admission submitted by someone and can through mutation, we can add sidecar to it. This would be creating some different resource based on some other resource, right? So
Yeah, this has like to your point, like bigger impact, I guess, but same effect
yeah,
in my mind because you're like you're adding something without the user knowing. I mean, it's the beauty of mutation, right? Like that's why we want it. But if used by the wrong person, yeah, bad things happen. That's
Yeah, another way of thinking about it, like if I think about GKE autopilot, for instance, they kind of lock down what the mutation webhook is allowed to mutate for that reason, right? They want to avoid
so can I
privilege escalation
add a
attacks.
sidecar?
What's up?
Can I add a sidecar? Does it let you add a sidecar?
I think it excludes certain namespaces. So
I
I Probably yes. I forget which exactly kinds are excluded. Pods, I think, would be like a bridge too far. But pods in the cube system namespace, probably no. And you have match conditions, things like that, that you could leverage for more targeted scoping. This would just straight up be cluster admin privileges for POCO. Or gatekeeper. Sorry, POCO is the policy controller, Google's fork. Yeah, I mean, it could be done. You're also looking at like getting into controller fights potentially, right? Like this would not be a quick feature. This would be a big feature. Is this blocking adoption by someone, right? Like I really think that this is like this should be the domain of someone other than admission controller audit product. Like if I squint, I could see it, but like, something like cert manager, right? Like I get it from the sense of like maintaining policy invariance.
Let's write another mutating weapon. I mean, you laugh, but that is.
Well, this is kind of like almost the remember back when we were designing mutation, we had one thought around insistent mutation. Like basically it would retroactively scan the cluster and any pre-existing objects, it would force them to comply with the mutation policies that were registered with Gatekeeper.
Oh, like after like brownfield stuff? Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh,
This is like 2021. We were talking
yeah,
about
I
this.
don't remember anything. I'm just kidding.
That was part of why convergence too, was that we were thinking of actively reaching out and reconciling, which that would be very bad if you had divergence.
Well, let's I see there's another topic. Jay, I guess like let's come is this something that we can come back later depending on how many people are asking? I think it's probably also because Kyverner offers it. It's sometimes it's like kind of awkward when you're like, oh, it's a really bad idea. Oh wait, but Kyverner offers it.
Right. I mean, just be if your friends jump off a bridge, would you?
I was thinking the same thing, Max.
Well, but that's I mean, I agree with you, but I'm just saying often, especially when somebody's like evaluating things, usually people are like, oh, I just want to get it done. I just want something that works. So sometimes that's the deciding factor. That and Rego,
I would be curious to know like how often people like make decisions based off of this particular feature.
It's hard because everybody has different use cases. There's usually a combination of many things, right? Yeah. But I'm just looking at our issues queue. Like it'd be good to see if people have asked us before.
I don't recall.
Yeah.
Like, I believe maybe there's one or two people and I'm just forgetting, but I don't think it's a common request. I see more requests around, hey, can I mutate based off of field values?
I actually see this one.
What's that?
This is one right here. I just put it in the chat. Someone did actually ask for this, but just one. That one.
February 16, what year? 2024. Ooh. Oh no, that's the mutation thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's this, but I think the use case is this because they're like, we're trying to add mutation for PDBs. Oh wait, no, this is, oh, sorry, I misunderstood. This is to change the default values of the PDB. Okay, that's different then. Okay, then let's just wait till people ask. Like, that's usually a good idea anyway. Yeah. Okay, can we go to the next topic?
Yeah. Yeah, the next one was, do we want to add any sort of migration guide to Gatekeeper from other products in our docs to make the adoption easy or make the migration easy?
Do you have any specific products in mind?
Again, so I was just looking at Kyverno, and they kind of have a parity check between Gatekeeper and Kyverno policies, like for which Gatekeeper policy you use what Kyverno policy. So it just came to mind that maybe something like a migration guide might make sense for us to.
Yeah, I'm.
Regularly have a migration like from Gatekeeper.
Yeah.
It's pretty in your face.
They came out the gate aggressive. I don't know if you remember their graduation thing where they made the feature comparison with Gatekeeper.
I think that makes sense because at the time, I think the Gatekeeper had more adoptions. I'm not sure about now, but
yeah, I don't know the relative market share. I think if we really wanted, though, to ease migration from Caverno to Gatekeeper, we would just use Caverno as an engine. Like, that obviously we can't like do that straight up because Caverno does things like generating policies, right? That even if we supported, we would never support in a constraint template because they should not have side effects. But like if we took that syntax, subsets of it could live in a template, and then that's a real easy migration story. Copy, paste, done. It's probably, though, not trivial to do, right?
Oh.
Like, I don't think Caverno's coded their stuff to be, oh, let's take a subset of our functionality and then we could just like import their syntax. I think it would be a parallel implementation unless they were down for refactoring. Was that?
And I will argue it's like, then why don't I just use Kyverno direct?
Well, that would be like if you wanted to migrate away from Caverno because you had needs that Gatekeeper fulfilled, right? Or like Gatekeeper and Caverno take very different philosophies, particularly around operationalization and organizational scale, right? Caverno is very flat. And frankly, like scaling with respect to cluster size, as far as I could tell, at least historically for them, has been a secondary design consideration. That's why when they wrote audit results, so like, let's just write it all to etcd resource, right? So I can definitely see someone outgrowing Caverno unless they've changed their tack in terms of like what they focus on with development. So that would be the use case: is you've outgrown Caverno, but you don't want to like incur the cost to migrate. We could like lower that cost some. How likely and how frequently that happens, I don't know. I actually don't keep super close tabs on the day-to-day of Kyverno's design.
Yeah, but I think just coming back to the original ask, I think it's useful to have a page mirroring our friend. But would it cause some like eyebrow raising bad taste? Probably. So I think the question here is more, is there enough ROI in doing that? Like, is it worth it, basically, right? Like,
I mean, my instinct is no. I feel like if Gatekeeper fits you, you kind of like can self-identify, right? Like there's, in terms of like the primary target user, there's a certain scale, right? And that's part of why there are things that we straight up don't do, even though they're useful for a more scrappy like startup.
So
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
can we write something about that? That why Gatekeeper is for you kind of page, if not migration guide, like help users who are visiting it for the first time, or like determining whether to.
Yeah. I think it's been a while since we've done any kind of like tooting our own horn. I think that could make a lot of sense. Because a lot of the stuff that was true then is still true now. And having a statement of philosophy, I think, could more ground, um, our decision making as well. So yeah, I like that.
Okay, so should I add it to the next agenda? We are over time. I definitely want to discuss more about like what do we want to write or what we don't want to write, kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll add it to the next agenda. There's nothing else from my side.
Well, it's good to see everyone.